Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
My friends, if you want to make a leftist angry, simply point out that the Nazis called themselves the Nazi Socialist Workers' Party. They will lose their ever-loving minds. That is a fact, by the way. There's dispute as to why they did this. Some say it was to win over the socialist support, the communists that would have been in the country years before the Nazis took over. They were being sympathetic. I see it a different way. I see that Nazis and socialists both want to control the economy in different ways, but at the end of the day, they exert more control over the economy than free market economists, free market capitalists ever would. I want to talk about this today. The words have meanings, and I will tell you, it's interesting to me listening to today's socialists, today's democratic socialists, basically correct me at every turn, not wanting anything that's actually going on out there that's the slightest bit bad to be tied to them. If it's bad, it's not part of what they believe in. If it's good out there in society, then it is, of course, what they believe in. This, it's gotten to the point where I think there's a much simpler way of looking at this, and I think it's important that we have the skills to be able to converse with these folks about these things. Those that will converse, many of them are completely enraged and angry. I hear from them. Of course, I don't read 95% of the comments, but I don't. I know that I've upset the socialists out there, the democratic socialists out there, and I want to talk about this today because I think it matters tremendously as we talk about the ideas that, of course, have made America great. And I think it's important equally to talk about the ideas that have brought misery and suffering and lack to people who have lived under these heavy-handed regimes, these anti-liberty, anti-freedom regimes and ideologies over the course of history. And I want to talk about this today. It matters tremendously as some people, and I'll kind of talk about how we got here as well. I've done this in the past when Bernie Sanders was, I don't want to say first on the scene because he's been around for a long, long time, but as he's run for president over the years that I've been behind this microphone, I've talked about a phenomenon where people can see that things are not working as they should, and they choose as a solution two diametrically opposing worldviews. And I'll go through that as well. These things matter tremendously, my friends. So we'll get there in due course. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to share your thoughts and questions and feedback, you can do so. You can email Todd at toddhuffshow.com. I'll read those. If you post angry, hate-filled comments on social media, you're wasting your time if you're expecting me to read those, because I don't. If you want to communicate with me, you email me or you can text me 317-785-1030. I do read those as well, my friends, and it's good to be here today. You know, if you're concerned about high cholesterol, listen, candidly, cholesterol has been given a bad name. Cholesterol isn't the culprit that some people have led us to believe. But there are still different types of cholesterol, and there are still times when we've got to keep that in mind and keep that in check. And that's where Soul Tea comes in. If you're worried about your cholesterol, if it's time to try to get the bad cholesterol, the LDL, into check, consider taking Soul Tea. It's an all-natural, clinically proven dietary supplement that can lower cholesterol. It's been proven to do so by science. There's no prescriptions. There's no doctor's visits. It's not even a drug, my friend. You just take 2 Soul Tea soft gels a day. That's all it takes to take care of your health. Soltea.com is where you can go. SOLTEA, Soltea.com. Promo code Todd will get you 50% off your first 3-month supply. and it will get you free shipping to boot. Again, Soltea.com, SOLTEA, promo code Todd is how you get that special offer. All right, let's talk about this for a moment. We've got these words out there floating around, these ideas, and I think it's important to understand this. So let's look at our political landscape today. We have, in our political landscape, we have people who call themselves democratic socialists. We also have a Democrat Party who has become very open, very captivated by the ideas and the belief system of straight out socialism, right? Straight up pure socialism. In fact, surveys by Pew Research have found, I talked about this just a few days ago, that 2 out of every 3 Democrats, 66%, find socialism to be favorable. They are attracted to the ideas. They are attracted to the belief system. And 2 out of 3 Democrats say that socialism is at least appealing on some level. I find this to be absolutely insane because I actually, listen, I read, I've studied this stuff in college, if that matters. You know, it's funny. I hear people on the left say, well, you're just a talk radio show host, a podcaster, an influencer. I'm not an influencer, my friends. I've been doing this for nearly 11 years. I want to talk about these ideas, share my viewpoints, help shape the discussion here, help cut through the clutter. That's really what I want to do. And they say, since I was not formally trained in this, I can't be a talk show host. I can't be a podcaster. Okay, but I was trained. I went to school. I got a degree. They love that. I got a degree from Butler University with a major in political science and a minor in philosophy. And they say, well, that doesn't count either. So I don't know what they just don't want to discuss the ideas. They talk about the credentials until the credentials don't fit what they want to discuss, or the credentials prove the opposite of what they of what they're trying to say, which is that I'm an idiot and a fool, and that you are too, if you agree with me. They don't, again, want to engage in discussions about substantive ideas because they are angry. Folks, do not misunderstand this point. Socialists are enraged. They believe that they have had things stolen from them. They believe that they're frustrated with their lives. They see problems out there. They live the problems, and instead of accepting any degree of responsibility, I'm here to be reasonable. I'm here to say, look, I understand that our government is out of control, but the problem is not that our system is fundamentally flawed. The problem is that there are people in our government who have abused their power, who candidly have asserted control already over the economy. They have taken away your liberty, infringed upon it. They have taken away your dollars. They've already built a pretty massive welfare state. And that's ironically who has created the problem. And so along comes this guy, Bernie Sanders, and others like him, Democratic Socialists of America. They insist on being called Democratic Socialists. I'm old enough to remember when they did not want the term socialism attached to them at all. In fact, this wasn't that long ago. I remember talking to people. Oh, no, who's socialist? There's no socialists out there. Meanwhile, a few short years after the folks in the Democrat Party were saying nobody's claiming to be a socialist, no one's trying to take away free market capitalism and all that. Now we have 2/3 of the Democrat Party who are in love with quote unquote democratic socialism. Listen, they're in love with socialism. Socialism, again, gives them, there's a lot that goes on here, but Bernie Sanders helped push this in, right? Helped to make this more mainstream. And so you have people who are frustrated, people who feel like they're victims of the system, people who candidly have done what they've been told to do, right? You're supposed to go out, get a college degree, get a job, making as much money as you can. You're supposed to, back in the day, you were supposed to have a family, the picket fence, a dog, right? You're supposed to help your kids, send them to public school, trust the public school to take care of everything. You would invest in their college savings. They would work towards a scholarship. You would dutifully prepare your kids to go and be indoctrinated by these radically insane leftists. Listen, I'm not against college for every kid or anything, but there's a lot of people. I would say there's a majority of people who go to college who have no business going to college. It's not necessary. It's not helpful. The system is designed to take your kids and young people, if you're a young person listening. I endured this 25 years ago, actually closer to 30 years ago now, when I went to Butler University and American University in Washington, D.C. To my knowledge, I never had an openly conservative professor. I had a feminist professor. I had a communist professor. I had radical leftist professors and atheist professors. These are the folks they gather in these universities. They live there because their ideas they can't work in the real world, and they can enforce by intimidation. They can tell you what their ideas are in these classes, and if you don't parrot back to them on the test or in your essays their ideas back to them perfectly, and sound like a good little foot soldier, a good little indoctrinated student, you will suffer the consequence from some of these professors. And it's gotten dramatically worse than when I was there. I had a professor that wouldn't grade my paper because I cited the Bible in an opinion paper. I've had all sorts of experiences. I've shared some of those here on this program. But you have people who go through this system and they get out on the other side and they think, all that's happened is college has gotten more expensive. Now people are saying, you got to go get your master's. You got to do more education. Trust the system even more. And listen, because the economy has, we don't have we already have high taxes. We already have lots of government intervention. That's what's caused these problems. Lots of inflation because they don't want to directly tax you. Inflation is when they create more money in the money supply than was produced, actually, true value produced in the economy. And so you've been stolen from there. Housing prices have gone through the roof. Wait until you see what's going to happen to housing in New York City. Wait until you see what's going to happen to groceries in New York City. Mamdani, communist Zoran Mamdani, the New York City mayor, has a plan to open 5 grocery stores. By the way, the first one was supposed to open this year or next, and I believe the first one is not going to open. I think I heard him say 2029. So they're already a year or two behind schedule, maybe 2 or 3 years behind schedule. They say they're going to be 30% less. The cost for groceries are going to be 30% less in these little communist bodegas than in these privately run bodegas. But the problem is, if you look and pay much attention at the grocery store industry, just do a little bit of research, you'll find that the average profit margin in these places is 2, 3, maybe 4%. So if these for-profit enterprises are only taking 2, 3, 4% gross profit margins, how in the world are these public grocery stores, these communist grocery stores, going to cut 30% off the cost of groceries? They're not going to be it's impossible for them to be better. I mean, listen, if you want to look at how efficient and how effective these folks can be, just look at the things the government runs today. Look at government-run schools. Look at government-run the post office. Compare the post office to, say, FedEx or UPS. It's not even remotely close. You might say, well, the post office has affordable ways for me to ship some things. Well, that's because, listen, subsidies are where they kick in at these grocery stores. Subsidies are the little, the man hiding behind the curtain, my friends. This is the way that it works. The only way for a publicly run grocery store in New York City or anywhere to be 30% less than a privately run grocery store or bodega is if the taxpayer dollar is funding it. That is what happens. You're paying for it one way or the other. I guarantee they will not be as efficient. There's absolutely no way, because there's no incentive to be more productive, right? There's simply no incentive. The owner of a bodega, of a grocery store, wants to maximize profits. The people who are in these grocery stores that are publicly owned simply will, there's no motivation to be better. That's the way that this works. Competition, of course, makes things better, and so do market forces. But if you try to keep those out of grocery stores or out of anything for that matter, you get less of something. You get things that are inferior. This has been demonstrated time and time again. It's why there were bread lines in the Soviet Union. They could not manage it. They could not manage it. There were no, again, competitive market forces. The incentive to be better and to maximize profits was gone. People get lazy. That's the way that this works. If you listen to this program during Thanksgiving time, you hear me talk about the true story of Thanksgiving in honor and in memory of the late, great Rush Limbaugh, but also to teach about these things. And that's part of the story, the true story of Thanksgiving. When the settlers were basically, instead of having a common share, as they did first at Plymouth, instead of having that, once they were given private property and the ability to do with that property and with their the things that they owned as they saw fit, they became more industrious. They became more profitable. They produced more. That's what happens. This is not a complicated thing. But again, the setup is necessary. You've got a bunch of disgruntled people who want to blame somebody. This is human nature. They want to blame somebody for their difficulties, for their plight. And they want to blame, who Bernie Sanders blames in many instances, the one percenters, right? The one percenters out there, the millionaires and billionaires, somehow are responsible for all the evils in the world. And so they blame them and they say, listen, they've stolen from you. They've taken from you what's rightfully yours. You need to get even with them. They can pay for it. The wealthy can pay for everything, say these socialists. And listen, it just is appealing to people. It's like me saying you're not responsible for any problem in your life. That might get me likes. That might get me views. That might get me people who want to high five me walking down the street because they say, hey, I like what this guy says. And the Bible talks about there being a time where the people will only want to hear what their itching ears want to hear. They have a desire to hear certain things, and that's where they will congregate, where they hear those messages. And you've got political opportunists. You've got other people who are looking for ways to get authority and influence and elected and everything else. And so they'll say whatever it is. Now, listen, I think some people believe this garbage. I think that they've been sold a bill of goods. They believe in the stated purposes of socialism and equality and equity, and all those things sound so good to these folks. But in reality, as I shared earlier this week, as Churchill said, the only thing that socialism guarantees equity in is an equity in suffering. We have an equality of suffering. There's no prosperity. There is, it doesn't work. It doesn't produce what's needed. It produces, if anything, it produces misery. So, but you've got the ingredients. You've got the politicians who are out there blaming someone else, that's saying, you don't need to look in the mirror in the morning. You don't need to change things that you're doing. Listen, and I fully understand. There are people that struggle happens. I've gone through long periods of struggle. It doesn't mean that, sometimes it's just a difficult row to hoe, as they say. Sometimes it is, there are lessons to be learned. You have to make improvements. But I guarantee one thing, it's not the direct responsibility of somebody else. But that sounds appealing. That takes the burden off of the individual. And you can look out there and say it's someone else's problem. And so if I elect these politicians are going to go out there and get even, take from the wealthy people who didn't really earn it anyway, and then redistribute it to me or to other people in the economy who have been victimized by these terrible people who are wealthy. Then now we have the perfect scenario whereby people embrace socialism. So you've got people who don't want to make the changes. You've got politicians who capitalize on that. Some of them, I think, really believing the nonsense the utopian ideals of these broken, morally bankrupt worldviews and ideologies. But you have some that are straight political opportunists. They will say whatever they have to say to get your vote, to get elected, and then to get to work at remaking this country into something that it never was intended to be. And so that's what's happening today. And so you have all these competing ideas. Look, when our founders established this country, these were intelligent men. These were people who were well-read. These were people who understood the problems with some of these other political ideologies. They didn't just latch on to the catchphrase of the day, my friends. These were people who understood human nature. They understood the problems that existed in governments that were tyrannical, governments that did not respect the individual. That's why they literally created something that was effectively brand new. And the Great American Experiment has done more to help lift the standard of living on this planet, to help lift more people out of poverty than anything else possibly could. Yet it is still treated as the problem by the socialists, the democratic socialists, and the communists, and anyone else who wants that, the fascists, anybody else who wants to have a government take control, no matter what that looks like. And so now we've got this perfect storm, and people say socialism is basically whatever you tell them that it is. It's not, right? You point out that socialism has caused suffering. You point out that Marx said the end goal of socialism is communism. You say any of those things, they'll say, well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about democratic socialism or a socialist economy or a larger welfare state. But all of those things, my friends, if you listen, don't get distracted by the details. Get distracted, or stay focused, I should say, on what it really is. It's more centralized planning, more government control, higher taxes. And when you have a growth in government, you have a shrinking of liberty and freedom. And that is 100% what's going on here. I have to take a break. My friends, as I get to the end here of this first segment. Folks, let's face it, every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of America that we want to live in. That's why we launched Freedom Marketplace. It is a free directory of businesses that align with your conservative values. These businesses have made a promise. They will not support leftist candidates, leftist causes, these socialist lunatics that we've been talking about here today. And if they break that promise, they will not be in the directory. So if you're tired of funding the woke agenda, visit freedommarketplace.net today. Do that today, freedommarketplace.net. It's free. It's easy. Liberty in business for all my friends. Time out for me. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. If you are dealing with discomfort, or if you're tired of living off of prescriptions and managing the side effects, you're not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural that they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals, a family-run natural creating company rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. There is no hype. There are no synthetics. There is no funny business. This is just the real deal done right. Real Kratom, my friends, is tested. It's responsibly sourced. The horror stories that you may have heard come from shady sellers, synthetic garbage that isn't even real Kratom. Start with their Kratom Starter Pack. Coupon code ToddHuff will save you 10% off your first purchase. Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency. Okay, talking here about socialism. Talking about the appeal of socialism. And, of course, we know that socialism is a big step in the wrong direction. So I made the comment yesterday. I pointed out that the full name of the Nazi Party was the Nazi Socialist Workers' Party. Now, there's obviously, with anything else, there's context that needs to be set forth. I hit on that briefly in the opening segment. I'm going to do that again. But in the wake of World War I, again, Germany was reeling. It was trying to, it lost massively in World War I. There was a lot of anger, but there were also, listen, there were ideas out there, people that were sympathetic, kind of like it is today here, sympathetic to communism and socialism. And so the movement tried to appeal to people with those belief systems, or those, I guess, desired people who desired some degree of communism or socialism. And so they put the phrase in their name. Now, I think by pointing that out, I've done more to explain what socialism really is than the socialists out there today have ever explained to us. If you notice, they tell you a bunch of things socialism isn't. We're not trying to take over this. We're not trying to take over free markets. We're not trying to put an end to that. We just want a little bit, they'll say, we want more things like the fire department. And I want to talk about that. Fire department, police, highways and roads, things that are funded and paid for by tax dollars. I want to talk about that, and I want to compare where they want to take us. I want to compare where they want to take us with where those things are today. So, but socialists don't ever really want to define what it is. But I think you got to strip through all that and understand that for every socialist that's out there, if there's 1,000 socialists sitting in a room, there are 1,000 different ways that they want to use the force. And this is the key. Listen, I reject the standard right versus left political continuum where you have communism and socialism on the left and you have fascism on the right. That is not the correct way of looking at politics. I know it's the way that we've been taught that we should, but listen, we were also taught that the food pyramid was a good thing, right? We were also taught that we should be able to trust the media, for example. There's a lot of things that we've been taught and told that were good and true that turned out not to be the case. I would include in the list of things that are not true, are not helpful, this particular way of looking at politics. In fact, these charts, these continuums, these visual tools were designed by people on the left. And so they say here you've got people on the left that want to create a certain type of society, a society of equality and all this sort of stuff. That's the communists and the socialists. And you've got the people on the other end who want to create nationalists and they want to create traditionalists and that sort of thing. This is the wrong way of looking at it. It truly is. The right way of looking at it is to say how much force is government using. And this is overly simplified, but I would say for the sake of sharing this on this program and for you to visualize this, I would say if you look at a continuum and you say on the left end are people that want to use a lot of force, that can take a lot of shapes. That can be fascist, that can be socialist, that can be communist, that can be any number of things where liberty is taken away, where state control is asserted up to the end game, which is absolute totalitarian state. Then on the right, on the far end of that continuum, you've got absolute anarchy, which of course is not a helpful way to live. You have no way to secure your rights in that sort of government. Our founders understood this and they said, look, we want a government that stays as far away from those totalitarian type regimes, that gives as much freedom to the people. It's already been given to them by God. We want to maintain that as much as possible. We want the smallest government possible to secure the liberties of the people and to provide national defense. And that's effectively what we want. And they took two stabs at this. The first was the Articles of Confederation, which did not give the government enough power to maintain and to do things they needed to do to navigate the problems and challenges that they were facing. The other form of government that came through the Constitutional Convention was the United States Constitution. And we have created something that worked quite well. And so the people agreed and said, we give to this government through this written document these responsibilities. We've given our consent. We are a free people, but we are saying here are areas that we give you our consent to manage through the federal government. And so that's exactly what happened. This is the opposite of how how other countries are formed. Other governments have been established to come in and tell the people, here's what we've decided. you can do X, Y, and Z, right? This is how it typically works, especially when you just have a revolution and you have people that have overthrown a previous government. Typically, they say, okay, the old guard is out. Now it's time for us to take the step to now assert our particular preferences, and now we're going to be the ones calling the shots and ruling the show. That is not what happened in this country, and it was a remarkable thing. And instead of being grateful for that, instead of being thankful for that, instead of appreciating that, we have a whole group of people who have been crying and moaning and just complaining that this society, this form of government has somehow impeded their freedom by not giving them enough money or whatever opportunity to succeed on their own. And so the government's got to get involved and make sure that there's equality in outcomes and all this sort of stuff. But see, government is force. That's the problem. Government is force. I actually want there to be as little force as necessary. The bigger the government is, the more force that's involved. The more force that's involved, the less liberty that's there. You were created, my friend, to live free. I want you to be free. If you're listening to this program and you're an insane, deranged lunatic on the left, I welcome you. I say that tongue in cheek. I do. You are a human being, and I care about you. I think you should be free to live your life and make choices, even if it's insane choices. I don't want to come in and stop you. The only time you should be stopped is if your choices directly impact the life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness of someone else directly. I don't mean by sharing your opinion. I don't mean by saying things or living a life that's inflammatory or offensive to them. There are plenty of things that I don't condone, that I have no desire to stop politically. I might try to use persuasion to say that is not, say, a godly way of living. That is not something that is condoned by our Creator. But I make that argument to be persuasive, not to use government to force you to say you can't do it. But this is, of course, what happens. The bigger the government, whatever you call it, socialist, communist, democratic, socialist, what it does is it creates less liberty, less individual choice. And that is not a good thing. Less individual choice, less of your own money is taking away your particular freedoms. And you should be able to live this side of heaven however it is that you want to live, so long as it does not, again, directly impact someone else's life, liberty, property, pursuit of happiness. That's the way that this should work. That's why our system is so incredible. The foundational system itself. We have deviated from that. We've had politicians that don't respect that. But the system itself is a beautiful thing. And we have strayed. We have gotten into mission creep, right? Where instead of protecting and securing the rights of our people, we've started looking for ways to redistribute wealth and everything else. And this is not helpful. This is not helpful at all. This is not what is good to a freedom-loving people. And so the left will tell you, the socialists will tell you that they don't want to have absolute control of the government. They still want you to have private property. They still want the private sector to maintain control of the means of production and so forth. But deep down, that's not what they want. In fact, again, if you read Marx, you'll see that he believed that the end goal of socialism is communism, a stateless, classless society. Of course, we never reached that point because in order to get there, the transition process, you've got to have people that have a lot of power who turn into authoritarian, brutal dictators who kill the people who disagree with them, kill their own people. History is full of examples of this. But not this time, they say, not this time. I got to take a break, my friends. Sit tight. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Third and final segment of the program today. Appreciate you tuning in and spending some time with us today. Again, if you want to kind of communicate with me and share your thoughts, you can do that through email, todd@toddhuffshow.com, or you can text 317-785-1030. I will read those, and I will do my best to respond to all of those. Friends, maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels like juggling more than just numbers. There's tax planning, there's estate work, there's investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when family office services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services give you access to a coordinated team with advanced option strategies, private equity, private credit, legal expertise, all those things, my friends, under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for the future, and making sure your legacy stays strong for generations. If you're ready for that next level of support, visit fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Okay, one of the things I want to hit on here today is that if you listen to the socialists, they'll tell you, the Democratic socialists, whatever they want to call themselves. Remember, these are people who prefer the government to use force and control. They prefer that over liberty. That's what they're saying. No matter what they say, no matter how much they try to pretend that is not what they're after, that is absolutely what they're after. They're actually after the dollars of the producers in our culture, in our society. But they'll often claim, they'll say, well, Todd, if you have a local fire department, if you like the police services, you're already a socialist. My friends, this is crazy talk. This is absolute crazy talk. To suggest that any service provided by government is automatically socialist is insane. Socialism, correctly understood, needs to be compared and contrasted with free market capitalism. Free market capitalism says that the private sector maintains control of the means of production. Socialism says that the government does. Now, there's people who say, well, it should be mixed and it should only be these certain areas and so forth. But let me paint the picture this way. Tell me there's not something dramatically different from saying that our government in a free society, the services it's going to provide are going to be, say, roads and bridges and fire protection and police services, right? Those are services that anyone could use, that I would say anyone could need at any moment in time. Emergency services like fire and police. And then, of course, roads. I mean, look, roads are everywhere. Roads are how we get places. And listen, there's an argument to be made by capitalists, by lovers of the free market that say, look, the only time that the government should step in is when it becomes complicated, or you could say it becomes messy if the free market's involved. And so can you imagine if there were a bunch of, say, roads that were privately managed? Maybe there's a way to do this. I don't know. But it's just easier to have, look, one set of roads that are maintained by the government. At least that was the thinking in the early days. And again, so everyone uses these things to get around, and everyone could potentially need fire or police services. Now, they want you to believe that if you believe in taxpayer-funded policing or fire departments or roads, that is the same thing as socializing everything. That's the same thing in their minds, or they want you to believe it's the same thing as wealth redistribution, giving people free, say, health care, or giving people, say, free college education, or taking away from the millionaires and billionaires in order to give subsidies to people who think that they deserve them. That is a far cry from the same thing, my friends. A lot of these things are targeted at individuals. It personally helps just an individual who, by the way, could go out and find other ways to make this happen, make a college education happen. By the way, I would also say that college education has been grossly over-exaggerated in importance. It's not necessary for many people. It's become a tool that the left has used to indoctrinate students into its morally bankrupt worldview and ideology. It's not the same thing. A government providing any services suddenly does not become a socialist government. In fact, technically, as long as the private enterprise, the private sector maintains control of the means of production, that prevents it from becoming purely socialist. Really what these folks want, and it's why they use the word democratic socialist. Really what they want is a larger welfare state. Some of them want the abolition of private property. I find less and less people really want this if you press them, but some of them do. What they really want, as I've said before, is for rich people to pay for things that they want. Instead of going and earning it themselves, they want there to be a subsidy. They want there to be a redistribution of wealth. And again, you talk about an ideology that's rooted in envy. This is it, my friend. Someone else has it. You think that you're entitled to it. You think they should pay for it. You don't like that they have a certain level of lifestyle or whatever else, and so you think you're entitled to it. I'm out of time here today. Got to run. Thanks for listening. SDG.